Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from Atlanta, Georgia in the USA, Chad Foster, who's an international motivational speaker, and he's author of the book Blind Ambition. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Chad. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you, Jürgen. It's my pleasure to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Now, I'm really looking forward to talk to you today and unpack your story in some ways. I've read the book. It's an inspiring book, and I'd certainly encourage everyone listening to this episode right now to read Chad's book, because we're not going to go into a lot of detail about the book. We're going to unpack some things from the book and from your story in some more detail. When I asked you in the pre-call to tell me about your business, here's what you said. You said you use your gift of going blind to help others see their own lives more clearly, and that you've helped large corporations make billions, but nothing compares with the feeling of helping someone make progress. It makes going blind worth it, which is an interesting comment. Now I know that I've lost my vision to help others find theirs. So there's so much in that I thought that is just amazing. So before we get on to some of those things, what's the legacy you aim to leave in the world, Chad?
Well, I think the main thing is, for me, I'm at the point in my life, I think a lot of us, as we start off our careers, we're trying to figure out how we can make our place in the world. And for me, at least, it was largely focused on how well I could do in my career. And a lot of that revolved around, what sort of jobs did I have? How much scope did I have? How much impact could I create in the business world? And I was very fortunate, to be honest with you. I was able to create some impact, was able to win some very large multi-billion-dollar deals. And, the older I got and the more successful I became, I had an experience when I went to Harvard Business School that sort of changed the way that I think about everything. And a lot of people probably think about Harvard Business School as all about business cases and things that you focus on in terms of the numbers and the metrics and driving profits. But I had a really pivotal moment there when I was studying with a professor there named Bill George, who was the former chair and CEO of Medtronic and author of Discover Your True North. And he talks about how to find your meaning and purpose in life, how to discover your true north. And a lot of times, in his book, he talks about how to unpack that with moments in your life that presented trauma and adversity, and how can you turn that into your profession. And a lot of my classmates were sort of grappling with that when mine just kind of reached up and smacked me in the face. I'd never really tried to do anything with my story before. I never really saw my story as all that different or inspiring, because it's my story. It's my everyday life. It's my ordinary. This is my ordinary. And so I never really looked into it all that differently than anybody else's story. And then I was elected to speak at our graduation at HBS. And for the first time in my life, I tried to use my story to help somebody, to help my classmates. And I'm not really normally a real soft and fuzzy person, right? I'm a sort of tough-minded guy. I've had to go through some pretty significant things in my life. But one of the gentlemen in my class, he comes up to me after my talk, and he's literally like, he's very impacted. He's very emotional by what I'd said. And I later found out that this particular gentleman had lost his daughter the year before to cancer. But something I said that evening helped him, and it gave him hope. Now, I'm not really, soft and fuzzy. I was sort of your typical sort of business guy. Didn't really think about the warmer side of business or leadership until that moment. And it was so powerful for me, that moment, that it inspired me to think about how I can move beyond myself and how I can use what's been given to me that I didn't ask for. I think all of us in our lives, we all get gifts that we don't want. A lot of those gifts are disguised in some really ugly wrapping paper. My gift of going blind, I never really saw as a gift for so many years until I saw the impact that I could have on other people by helping them think differently about the circumstances that life inevitably presents all of us. None of us can control everything that happens to us, but we can all control how we respond and how we show up, because at the end of the day, Jürgen, this is my life, so I've got to own it, and it's your life and your listeners' lives, and we all have to own our lives at the end of the day. So my legacy that I want to leave is taking what I've been dealt, the circumstances and my response to those circumstances, and the learnings from the adversity that I've faced, and pivoting that into an opportunity to show people and teach people how they can live more resilient lives, they can live happier and more successful lives. Because the irony of it all is today I'm more successful and I'm happier than when I could see. I'm actually a better person because of my blindness and not in spite of it. I really believe that if I could still see today, I would be not as successful and not as happy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was one of the parts in the book that I found very moving. Simply, first of all, that you had that impact on the other person, but then your realization that, hey, this is something that I can do. This is something that I can give to others. Did you, before that particular event, did you already have this philosophy of this is a gift disguised in ugly wrapping paper, and I can gain benefits from this gift, as you call it? Or was that the moment when you kind of realized that was what it was?
That was the moment, really. I saw it as, I never really saw myself as disabled per se. I knew that I'd been given circumstances that were unfavorable. My eyesight was poor. I lost it over the course of, starting roughly at, my late teens, early 20s. I started to lose my eyesight. I was able to do a lot of things with my eyesight. Before then, I played sports, played football and basketball, and drove a car and all those things. But I never really saw myself as disabled. And I guess that helped me navigate the situation that I was presented in my early 20s, when I had to relearn how to learn, and I had to figure out how to use my computer and be able to write code to engineer software just to be able to use my computer, without even being able to see my computer screen. I had to write code and engineer that software just to do my job. I never really saw any of those things, any of the things that I'd been going through, as gifts. And I think it's because I'd never really, I'd almost tried to avoid it. Tried to gloss over it or hide from it. And maybe I was trying to avoid it because I was, self-conscious about it. Maybe it was because I didn't want to feel like the obstacles that I were facing were any more extraordinary than the other obstacles that people face. I think we all, our own obstacles, the difficulties relative to what we've been through, right? Our own adversity that we face, the yardstick that we use, or the measuring stick that we use to measure adversity, is based on our own experiences in our lives. And so I guess I just didn't want to accept that my life was as hard as I thought it, as others thought it was. And so up until that point, I'd never really thought of it as a gift. But once I saw how powerfully it could help other people if I were to just put a little bit of effort behind it. It was such a pivotal moment for me. It was a real inflection point in my life, because then I knew, you can't unknow what you know. Once you've seen the impact of what just getting up and saying, telling your story for 12 minutes, you can't unknow that. And you can't forget about the experience that you created for those other people in the room. And so after that, I sort of felt like, you know what, I have to do something with this. It would be like irresponsible of me to not do anything with this. And so from that point forward, I started putting more effort into speaking. And then that's when I started looking into how to actually write and publish a book. And so obviously I started putting more effort behind it, but it was because of that positive reaction during that experience that evening.
That's fascinating. One of the philosophies you describe in the book, and I think this comes early on, is that excuses are for losers and I'm no loser. Is that something that you already had before you developed this other philosophy of this as a gift that is just in ugly wrapping paper?
Yeah, I think it started pretty early on, if I'm being honest, because I had pretty difficult time learning the limitations of my eyesight. I was diagnosed at 3 years old with RP, and my parents had noticed where I was bumping into things in dark areas. And so they took me to Duke University Medical Center. They diagnosed me with retinitis pigmentosa there. And as I began to play and learn the limitations of my eyesight, I would find out things are there by bumping into them. So whether it was a downspout or a water pipe on the back of a truck, I would bump into that, and inevitably I would end up in the hospital. And so I had a lot of physical pain growing up, sort of using the world as a walking cane, if you will, learning that, oh, I can't see well at dusk, or, oh, this gives me problems, right? And so that's a pretty painful process physically to go through. And then on into middle school and high school, it became socially painful. Some of the limitations of my eyesight, not being able to drive at night, for example, not being able to play basketball because of the lighting in the gym, or being able to play football because the games were at night. Those things were pretty uncomfortable. But then, my background in sports also gave me sort of the mindset that you need to play sports, training on days that you really don't want to train, right? It takes mental toughness and it takes mental discipline. And, do you want to win more than you hate losing? And so I was always the kind of person that I hated losing, I think, more than I liked winning. And so I always wanted to compete. And, the intersection of those things, as my eyesight began to fade and I had this sort of background and really this desire to be more competitive, I think I always did sort of think that excuses are for losers. But I had a moment that I won't forget. I was about 17 years old, and my dad is sitting me down, and I'm going through the process of my eyesight continuing to fade, and he sits me down and says, "Look, son, I hate it for you, but at the end of the day, the world doesn't care that you can't see. The world doesn't care. Person to person, there's some empathy, there's some compassion out there, but in the the vast ocean of humanity, it just gets swept under the rug." And so I did sort of adopt that philosophy from a very early age, that excuses are for losers. And if you stop and you think about it, how is it better to comfort yourself in the moment with an excuse, or would you rather hold yourself accountable so that you can fulfill your goals and your dreams? At the end of the day, as far as we know, nobody's getting a do-over in life. Nobody gets a do-over. And so if we're also fortunate to live a long life and look back on our lives when we're in our golden years, whether that's 70, 80, 90 years old, pick a number, how will you feel if you don't get what you want out of your life? Is it better to comfort yourself in each moment with an excuse, or would you rather hold yourself accountable so that you can achieve your goals and your dreams? Because I know at the end of my life, or at the end of the day, this is my life. So I've got to own my life. And it's your life. And it's, we have to own our lives and our outcomes. If we don't, who will, right? And for me, an excuse is almost like trying to find a legitimate reason to fail. Do you really want to look too hard for a legitimate reason to fail? I'd much rather spend my effort trying to find ways to get to what I want out of life, even if circumstances change. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the phrases you use a lot in the book is the stories we tell ourselves, and that you've just reminded me that an excuse is kind of a story we sometimes tell ourselves, right? And it's not just a reason for failing. We're almost telling ourselves we are going to fail. We're almost pre-programming that. Is that what you mean by the stories we tell ourselves and the language we use?
Yes. So that is definitely one of the interpretations of it. At the end of the day, at the end of our lives, all of us will become our stories. That I believe. I believe that we are all byproducts of our narrative that we have inside of our heads. So look, when I went blind, fundamentally, I could have told myself one of two stories. One story is, Chad, look, you went blind because you've got terrible luck, right? And technically, that could be true. A second story, a better story that I could choose to tell myself is that, Chad, you went blind because you're one of the very few people on this planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome it and use that to help other people. Now, if both of your stories can be true, why wouldn't you choose to tell yourself the best story? One of the stories that I could choose paints me as a victim, right? I've got terrible luck. It's the excuse story. The second story, the better story, it's like a Jedi mind trick, right? All of a sudden, you're transforming something that's a perceived disadvantage into an advantage. I went blind because I'm mentally strong enough to deal with it, which means I'm strong enough to deal with all of the other curveballs that life is going to throw at me. I've taken this weakness of blindness and turned it into mental strength. And after you do that with repetition and with thought and intention over time, and continue to tell yourself better stories, all of a sudden you can reframe your situation. If you look up essentially the clinical definition of resilience, is cognitive reframing. The meaning that we attach to circumstances is far more significant than the facts alone. What are the stories you're telling yourself about your circumstances? Yeah. Are the stories you're telling yourself, are they setting you up as a victim? Or are they setting you up so that you can bounce back better than before?
Yeah, it's about, and you mentioned it earlier, it's about controlling what we can control and then taking ownership or taking responsibility for those things that we can control.
That's right.
One of the pivotal moments, I think, in the story, in your story that you describe in the book, is when you first went to Leader Dogs for the Blind, which is where you get your guide dogs from, and you met other people there and learnt about the issues that they were having. So tell us a little bit more about that and how that impacted on you at the time.
Yeah, that was a profound moment in my life. I was 23 years old at the time. I had recently come to the realization that the onset of blindness was occurring. I was losing my eyesight. I could no longer walk around safely, so I knew that I had to get a guide dog. And I went to Leader Dogs for the Blind to learn how to use a guide dog, but I ended up getting a lesson there from the people there that was far more impactful than anything that I learned with the dog. Some of the people there, they had mental impairments on top of being blind. Some of the people there were on dialysis because they had diabetes that had robbed them of their eyesight. And so they were blind and on dialysis. And there were these girls there, I'll never forget, these girls, they were deaf and blind. And these brave souls, these women, were getting a guide dog so that they could travel independently. Now, for these girls, we had to talk with an interpreter who would sign into their hands, and that was literally the only way that they could communicate. And despite their unimaginable challenges, they were getting a guide dog so that they could walk around, travel independently. And look, it's one thing when you just meet someone on the street and you hear how rough they have it. But I lived with these people for 26 days, and I saw their challenges firsthand for 26 days. And so I came away with a new appreciation, a new outlook on life. I learned that, a lot of people think that happiness is a feeling, and it's not. Happiness is not a feeling, and it's not an emotion. It's a decision. It's a perspective. It's a choice we make every single day when we wake up. We either choose to be intentional about how we're going to look at things in our lives, or we just allow random circumstances to affect our happiness. None of us controls everything that happens to us, but we all get to control how we respond. So, I learned the power of choice, and we all have the power to choose our response, to choose our attitude, to choose our perspective. And once you start reframing your perspective to focus on things that you do have and you can be appreciative for, that we all naturally take for granted, then you can start to build real gratitude. And gratitude, turns out, is the anchor for happiness. That does lead to happiness, and happiness ultimately leads to success. So for me, it was the biggest shift in my thinking over the course of my entire life, is meeting these people who profoundly changed the way that I looked at my situation.
Yeah, I think that's a very, to me, certainly it was a very moving part of the story. I really like that you say happiness is not a feeling, not an emotion. I mean, obviously, if we make that choice to be happy, we put our state of mind into that happiness sphere, if you like. It does trigger positive emotions. It does trigger positive feelings. But what your point is that it's a choice. And you talk there about gratitude. So what do you do to practice gratitude?
Well, every night with my children, I have 2 kids, I'm married. I've been married for almost 20 years, be 20 years next month. But we all go around and list 3 things that we're thankful for each day. And so at night before bed, we all do we call it our thankfulness. And I want my children to learn the muscle memory of gratitude. And I want them to learn the muscle memory of gratitude by stepping through the activities of each day, the things, the small things, could be small, could be big. Sometimes it's profound, like, our health, or the fact that, we have the lifestyle that we have. But sometimes it's the little things that we all take for granted. Maybe it's the meal that we had that we wanted to have for a couple of weeks, or something nice that happened when we were out, or the nice thing that someone did for somebody else, right? Sometimes, we do favors for people in the family. And so it doesn't have to be big, but it does need to be conscious, and it does need to be thoughtful. And so nobody can say something that the other person said. Everybody needs to come up with their own unique things to be thankful for. Mm-hmm. But what I hope happens is that this very conscious and deliberate effort of placing our attention on the things that we all take for granted, doing that every day for a period of time, ultimately leads to the muscle memory for my kids, so that they will instinctively be thankful for the things that have been presented them. And so that's one thing that I do. I do practice mindfulness as well, and I journal regularly. And so, sitting down and regularly journaling things that, that brought you joy, or that brought you, moments of fulfillment. How can you, get that down on paper? I type that out in my notes app. But just being intentional about calling it out every day, I think, is a very good practice that does build the instincts and the muscle memory and into the way that we show up every day.
Yeah, that's a fascinating practice. And isn't it true that there's so much that we take for granted, isn't it? I mean, even reading your book and now speaking to you, and I reflected on this morning as I was preparing to jump on this call. I said, well, I wonder what this would be like, what I'm doing now, if I didn't have my eyesight. And I have my eyesight. I've had my eyesight all my life. I've never had an issue with it other than a little bit of short-sightedness, and I have had cataracts done, but it's something that we take for absolute granted. The same with hearing, the same with touch, all these things, and yet practicing that mindset of gratitude for all of those things, as well as the things that are perhaps different or unusual that happen, which it's probably a lot easier to practice gratitude for those because they're out of the ordinary.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I fell in the same camp, right? I took my eyesight for granted until it was gone. And then I was around these people at Leader Dogs, and, I realized, hey, look, I'm taking for granted my hearing. I'm taking for granted the fact that I don't have diabetes. I'm taking for granted the fact that I don't have any mental impairments. How many of us stop to actually think about, I'm taking for granted that I live in a country that has great opportunity. I'm living in a country to where we now have an information-based economy, a services-based economy, to where I can have productive work. I don't have to go out and work in a field where I can't see. I didn't ask to be born, in the 20th century, living in the 21st century. I could have just as easily been born in medieval times or the Middle Ages. I could have been born in a country without access to opportunity. How many of us stop to actually think about those things and say, you know what, I didn't sign up to be born in this time, in this country, into a family that has given me opportunity. All those things, I think all of us kind of take those things for granted until we can't, until something disruptive happens and forces us. And for me, that disruption was my experience at Leader Dogs. It really forced me to re-examine my life and look at the situation and come to find out, honestly, when you stop and think about it, this is a really good time to go blind. There's a lot of technology out there. There's the internet. There's, assistive technology. There's guide dogs, all these things. None of us want to sign up to go blind. But look, if there was ever a time to go blind, now's the time. I don't want your listeners to think I'm recruiting them or anything, but it's a really good time to go blind.
Yeah. It is true that there's so much to be grateful for in terms of what we have today, in terms of technology. I mean, simply the fact that we're talking to one another from different hemispheres of the world, from tens of thousands of kilometres apart, that we can just do that is amazing. It always amazes me when I get on this podcast. One of the things that just shone through there, and I was going to touch on this, is your humour and your ability to take your own blindness and turn it into humour, set the scene for other people. And it's almost like you're poking fun at yourself, but you're also disarming the other person and making people feel comfortable with dealing with you just as an ordinary person in many ways, right? So did you always have that kind of self-deprecating humor, or is that something that's developed as well?
Well, I think I've always been a little bit of a prankster, a little bit of a jokester. I always like to make people laugh. Just my source of material got a lot easier after I went blind. I didn't have to work as hard to find good material. But I do think it's important to, you hit the nail on the head, right? Most people, I'm not sure if they get it, but it is very disarming. And so whether I'm giving a keynote presentation to 5,000 people, or I'm walking into the boardroom to present a business case or business proposal or whatever the case may be, I use humor a lot because I find that, people are sometimes uncomfortable. They're not sure, like, what can I say? What can I not say? Did you see the game? Oh, wait, I don't mean did you hear the game? Just these little things where, words really don't matter. It's the intention that matters, but people aren't really sure how to respond. And so what I like to do is put people at ease really quickly. So, a lot of warmth, a lot of relatability through that self-deprecating humor, but then obviously showing them that, I do have the competence to do what I'm here to do. And so it's a combination of how do I use humor to make me relatable and to put them at ease. But then in the case of whether it's, business content or some of the content that I deliver in a motivational keynote presentation, it's the content. Some of the things that I have to say are a little heavy. Some of them we talked about here, telling yourself the right stories, visualizing greatness. You have the power to choose. Excuses are for losers. Some of those things can be difficult to hear for a lot of people, but wrapping humor around some of those things can make them a lot more digestible. And so how can I connect with people in a way that they are ready to receive it? Because, some of the stories that I tell, and you've read them in the book, and I tell a lot of them on stage too, they're pretty heavy. Those are some pretty heavy stories, but by wrapping humor around them, it makes it a lot easier to hear, and the audience gets a lot more out of it that way, I believe.
Yeah, there's so much in the book that's kind of, and some of them I only got the second time listening through. So I listened to the audio book, and the second time around there was some, there's a little bit of humor in that. I missed that going through the first time. One that struck me as I was listening this time around was where you basically stepped off a high retaining wall with your guide dog, and the guide dog had stopped, but you took the first step, and so I think you said something like, and I can't remember, was that Romeo or Miles?
That was Miles.
So you said, "Hey, we're going for a trip. We're going for a trip or something like that. We're going for a little trip."
Yeah, we're going for a ride. This is on you, buddy. Yeah, you're gonna have to go on the ride with me. Yeah. I classic mistake of
what was some of
taking the first step.
Yeah. So the key is the dog had stopped, so you had to let him guide you rather than you guide the dog.
Yeah, that's the advice I got from the school after I called them about it. They said, "Well, you took the first step. You should never take the first step." Fair enough. I was a new guide dog user at that point. You learn that lesson one time. It doesn't take two.
So what was some of the lessons that you got out of working with a guide dog? I mean, there's, many of us have pets, but working with what probably is a pet as well, working with them and developing that relationship to a total trusting one. What are some of the key lessons that came out of that?
Well, I think the first thing is it taught me to be more patient. I've been a bit of an impatient person for a lot of my life, but using a guide dog forces you to have a bit more patience with the situation and let things unfold. It certainly taught me that, it's easier to catch a bee with honey, than it is to try to get the dog to do something you want based on, command and control. The more fun you can inject into a task for the dog, because the dogs, fundamentally, they're working for two reasons. One reason is they love you, and the second reason is it's fun. And if they don't love you, if you're a jerk to them all the time, they're not gonna do very good work for you, right? So you have to make sure that the bond is key, but at the same time they have to respect you. And so it's this fine balance of, I love you, I want you to do well, and I'm going to give you every incentive to do well, but I also have to hold you accountable. And so it's that fine line of making sure the dog knows that you've got their best interest at heart. But at the end of the day, they have a job to do, and so it's a fine line you have to walk there. But then that second point, just making sure that you keep everything fun. And so if you're stressed out, if you have a lot of anxiety because maybe you're lost or you're not sure where you're going, all of that energy bleeds over to the dog, and so the dog will be affected by it and less likely to do their job effectively. And so I've learned, I travel all over. I did at least before COVID. I'm starting to travel again. I've been with just me and my guide dog, the two of us traveling from Atlanta to all over the world, Europe and Asia, between, Germany, Singapore, China, Tokyo, Korea, Spain, Italy, all over, just us, right? And I've sort of leaned into the discomfort of, okay, I might get lost. I can't read the signage, obviously. I can't speak the language sometimes. So, you know what? We're just going to have fun with this. And you start to learn how to lean into the discomfort. So instead of it becoming the stress that it is for a lot of people to travel, a lot of people get really stressed when they travel, right? I don't get stressed when I travel. I've realized that it's not going to serve any purpose other than create more anxiety for my dog. And so what's going to happen will happen. I'm just in the moment, right? I'm just being on my task at hand, and I'll see what the adventure presents us. Maybe, everything will go flawlessly. I doubt it will go flawlessly. Chances are something will go wrong. I don't know what it will be, but we'll have fun with it. We'll roll with the punches at the end of the day. If we make it to where we're going safely, that's all that really matters.
Yeah, and whatever happens, you might end up with some other stories for some of your humor. I've
got a bunch of stories. I could go on for a long time about about some of the things that I've encountered, especially with the dog. Every time I get on an elevator, I can tell, Jürgen, I get on an elevator and people are, I have a 100-pound German Shepherd. And so people are a little put off by the German Shepherd. So almost without fail, I can kind of feel the tension in the elevator. And I'll turn to the person next to me and say, hey, don't worry. He hasn't bitten anyone in weeks. And you can feel it go, wait, what, weeks? What do you mean weeks? What does that mean? But you have to have a little fun with it, You have to keep things light and say, no, I'm just kidding. He doesn't bite, obviously, but I had you there for a second.
Yeah, that's right. He said, don't worry, I fed him this morning, so he won't bite.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, yeah, this is absolutely fabulous, Chad. I can keep going for ages, but we want to leave something in the book for the listener to go and actually read the book and get some more lessons. I think it's a good time now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask of every guest. And the idea is you'll give some answers that will inspire some action with the listeners today. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So first question is, what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
The number one thing people need to do to be more innovative, I would say, is get comfortable with discomfort. Get comfortable with different points of view. Be able to have conversations about difficult topics in a way that disarms the situation. So if you're never talking to people who think something differently than you, you're probably not going to be very innovative. You need to talk to people who have different opinions than you, because I really believe that diversity of thought creates change, and that is the engine for innovation. But if you're not able to have difficult conversations where people have different points of view in a way that's mutually respectful and invites people to bring different ideas in an open and collaborative way, you're probably not going to get to innovation. You have to be able to have those difficult conversations in a way that makes everybody feel welcomed and valued to contribute. And that really starts with just being genuinely curious, and appreciating where people are coming from, and knowing that they believe what they believe because of the collection of experiences in their lives. And so when you show up with a little dash of humility and a lot of curiosity, you can learn a lot from somebody else, and that eventually will help inform your thinking over time.
Yeah, I love that. The curiosity and humility and accepting that. I can't remember who said this, but the quote stuck with me. It was, everyone knows something I don't know. And bringing that curiosity, I wonder what it is, and I wonder why they're taking a different approach or why they have a different opinion to this. So it requires a lot of listening as well.
It does. It absolutely
So what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas or...
Go ahead.
Sorry to talk over you there. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
The best thing that I've done to develop new ideas, I think, a lot of people are maybe a little put off when they're surrounded by really smart people. But I would say to develop good ideas, surround myself with people who I think are smarter than me. How can I get as many people around me who have high intellect? When I'm trying to hire people for my team, I look for a couple of things, right? Things that you can't really teach: intellectual horsepower, curiosity, and drive. If you have a very high drive to do something great, to do something impactful, you're intellectually curious, and you're able to figure things out very quickly. I can't teach you those 3 things. Either you're born with those things or you're not. So if I hire for those 3 things and surround myself with people like that, then I know the ideas will absolutely explode.
Yeah, that's great advice, having a team around you that really contribute and have that positive mindset. So it's the classic hire for culture and train the tactics, or train the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, knowledge can be consumed. Knowledge and process can be consumed, but either they have the things that cannot be taught, or they don't, right?
Great. I love that. Knowledge can be consumed. I think I might know the answer to the next question, but I will ask it anyway, and I'll let you answer it, and maybe I'll be surprised. What's a favorite resource you use most often?
Favorite resource? What do you mean for what? I'm curious. In what context? Like for learning? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, it could be for learning, could be in the work you do.
I'd say my favorite resource. In terms of knowledge, I would say I use a lot of Audible as a resource for learning. I read a lot. So I read, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 books a month. And so if I'm just reading, I'll use a lot of Audible or a lot of Kindle, because obviously I'm not very good at paperback anymore. For research, like most of us, I'll, use Google or something like that. For other things like expanding my horizons, it's funny how you can learn from seemingly inconspicuous things. Like, I just 6-7 months ago, I started taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And you would think that is just, a lot of physical activity that takes place, but there's a tremendous amount of learning that exists in something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just what you can learn about yourself and how you show up, and, how that you encounter other people, and how you think about fear and how you face your fears. And so you learn a lot about, I think you can learn from lots of different things. And the other, one final thing I'll throw in there is just mindfulness, being able to sit with you and learn about yourself. And so being able to sit with your own thoughts for 30 minutes a day and get comfortable with, how you show up in each moment, and how you're feeling and how you're thinking, and how all those things play into how you show up for others.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I guess a common theme through that is a curiosity again, and really listening to self, listening to others, observing what's happening in jiu-jitsu, for example, the curiosity part, and how can that be applied in other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Because think about it,
when you're working.
Sorry, I think we have a little bit of a lag there. But if people are never curious and they're never getting outside of their comfort zone, if we're never getting outside of our comfort zones ever, then we're not growing. And so, who wants to live a life without any growth? And so, for me, it's a very important thing to continue to push myself outside of my comfort zone, whether that's with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or skiing a double black diamond, not being able to see, or taking on a new task, like just learning more about myself, just continuing to stay curious and seeking that growth. Yeah,
I love it. And we haven't even talked about the skiing the double black diamond. All right. Now, when you're working with clients, what's the best way to keep them on track?
In terms of I'm working with clients who hire me to come in and speak, how do I keep them on track with the meetings that we're having to prepare?
Yeah, for example.
Yeah, I think it's really good for me to, first of all, have my list of things that I need to cover. So I need to know, in the case of speaking, there's a lot that I know about an event that a lot of clients really haven't thought through. And so I need to make sure that I cover all of those things. But to keep them on track, right, I show up to the meeting. I don't just start going down my list of things. The first thing that I want to do is sit down and, no surprise, be curious and listen to their objectives. What are the objectives that they have? And so after I've heard what they want to achieve, then it's a matter of sort of looping back. So whenever I'm, active listening with somebody, there are a couple of things that you can do. One of the things that I like to do is loop back, paraphrase in my own words what I'm hearing them say to make sure that I'm fully connecting with them so that, not only am I hearing them, but they feel like I'm hearing them. They feel heard and they feel understood. And that allows us to really build a strong connection. So whether it's, looping or, paraphrasing or creating a summary of what it is that I think that they're looking for, but then obviously, making sure that once I've built that connection and they feel like I've heard them and they feel understood, then it's okay, what are the things that they may be overlooking? And so having the structure and the ability to weave that into the conversation so that I can get what I know I need to know in order to make the event a successful event. Because there are certain objectives that they may have, but certain things that they're not considering. So how do I bring those two together in a conversation that really, brings us closer together as opposed to, having a conversation that appears, clunky or disruptive, right? Making them feel heard first is very important.
Yeah. So a lot of active listening and then focus back on the objectives. And I think you also said at the beginning you've got a checklist of things that need to be covered.
Absolutely. Yep, that's exactly correct.
Okay, well, the final question of the buzz round is, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that anyone can do to make themselves stand out is learn how to be comfortable with who they are and get to a point of being unapologetically authentic to who they are. Really owning their situation, whatever their situation is. When I first went blind, I was trying to pretend that I could see everything was okay. When the truth of the matter is, I couldn't. And so I was walking around without a cane, without a guide dog. And I was essentially trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to act as if my eyesight was okay. But when I got my first guide dog and I stopped trying to pretend that my eyesight was okay, that's when my comfort level with myself really went up. I had to own my situation. You can't really hide a 100-pound German Shepherd in a conference room. So I learned to be unapologetically Chad. And that to me was one of the biggest gifts that my blindness has granted me, is learning how to be true to myself regardless of my circumstances and just knowing how to own my situation. So if people want to differentiate themselves, just owning their situation and just being authentic to who they are is my recommendation.
Yeah, and that's like you talk about the gift, and that's a gift that we all have, isn't it? Because that's who we are. So just owning that and being authentic to that. Excellent. Well, thanks, Chad. Now, where can people reach out to you, maybe say thanks for what you've shared today, and certainly learn more about you, the work you do, your speeches, take a look at your YouTube channel, also the book, of course?
Yeah, they can find me at chadefoster.com. I am on social media as well. They can find my handles on my website at chadefoster.com. My social media for Instagram, Facebook is find Chaddy Foster. Twitter is just at Chaddy Foster. And the book is on Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. It's all over. So they can find links to that on my website, or they can go to their local book retailer and find copies there as well.
Excellent. And of course, we'll have those links in the show notes as well, so people can click straight through. Two more questions. What action would you like our listener to take out of today's conversation, Chad?
I would like for each listener to learn how to control and think about the stories that they're telling themselves about themselves and their situations, so that they can at least make sure the narrative that they have playing in their minds is the narrative that they want. And if they're telling themselves stories that aren't taking them to where they want to be, then they take action on that. They choose to tell themselves a better story. All of us, at the end of the day, we're all films and the director of the movie that's called our lives. And so we have to learn how to take control of how we write the ending for our stories.
That's great advice, and I love the metaphor, and it's funny you use so many visual metaphors. But it's true, we're kind of the director of our own life story movie. We're the writer, we're the producer, and it's all in our control.
Absolutely.
All right, and finally, who else should I get on the show and why?
Well, I have a friend of mine that I'm going to put you in touch with. I will send you some contact information, but she is working on how to bring kindness to business. And I think you're really going to enjoy having her. And kindness doesn't necessarily, a lot of people think about kindness in business as, oh, it's going to, be squishy. It's not. There's real value in bringing kindness to business. And so I think people will really benefit from hearing a point of view that we don't get to hear a lot of, and that is bringing kindness to the business community can actually create better connection among associates, but also drive real value for the business.
Great. Well, I look forward to that introduction, and sounds like a really fascinating topic to explore. So thanks again so much, Chad, for sharing your time and your insights so generously with us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I really enjoyed reading or listening to the book. I did read some of it, but I listened to the audio book. That's my preferred way of consuming those. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed following up on some of the points from the book, and we should do this again sometime.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback on the book. And yeah, that's my preferred way as well. Not that I have a lot of choices now.
Right.
I think Audible is the way to go.
Yeah. All right. Now, do you have any plans for speaking in Australia in the near future?
I've done a couple of virtual events with COVID. I've been working with a couple of clients there. I am looking at, now that things are opening back up, I don't have any in-person there yet. But a couple appear to be on the horizon now that things are starting to get a little bit more, open there. I have done several actually virtual talks with some clients in Australia, but those are not nearly as much fun as the in-person. We do the virtual when we can, but obviously there's a lot more energy, a lot more excitement in person if we can have those.
Okay, well, let's stay in touch, and if you, when you do have an in-person event, hopefully nearby where I am, then we'll find a time to get together.
I'd welcome that.
All right. Well, thanks, Chad, and all the best for the future.
Likewise. Thank you, Jürgen.